So what happens when a title you inherit at birth? I mean, royal status smashes head-on into the modern world.
Right, a world of relentless media, of accountability, of intense financial scrutiny.
That collision is exactly what we're dissecting today. And it is quite a fascinating case study in privilege meeting the 21st century spotlight.
It really is. It's a story of how that inherited position, well, it often fails to protect people from the consequences of their own choices.
Especially when those choices involve huge debts and some very controversial friends.
Exactly. And the book we're looking at, the way Lownie details the mechanisms that allowed this to happen within the institution itself, it's incredibly revealing.
And we are excited to be trying something a little different today with this deep dive. We want to give you a new in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary. So unlike our previous review, which was more of a focused analysis.
This is broader, a comprehensive overview.
Exactly. We'll be tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of the book. If you find this expanded format helpful, please let us know. Your feedback really does help shape what we do.
So our mission today is centered on Andrew Lownie's, frankly, explosive joint biography entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York.
And this book details the journey of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, doesn't it?
It does. It follows their transformation from this glamorous, high-profile royal couple into figures just mired in scandal. It focuses on their very intertwined lives, their constant financial dramas, and their connections to a deeply controversial international circle.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should probably start at the very beginning. The foundation of the House of York, what Lownie calls the rise.
Right, and their early lives were just worlds apart.
Andrew's was defined by, well, extreme privilege. As the Queen's second son, the book describes a childhood where he was just completely indulged.
And not just by his parents. Critically, by the huge staff that was always around him.
And Lownie argues that this indulgence wasn't just about luxury, was it? It was more psychological.
Oh, absolutely. It was the seed of the entitlement that we see play out later. But then you have Sarah Ferguson. Her path was so different, marked by family instability, emotional upheaval.
She came from an upper-class background, but she didn't have that kind of ironclad royal protection.
Which, Lownie suggests, drove her to desperately seek validation in those social circles that were always orbiting the royal family.
Their early careers were also a huge contrast. The pivotal event for Andrew early on was his military service.
The Falklands War.
The Falklands War. That campaign cemented his public image as the brave action prince. But Lownie argues it became something more, like an untouchable shield.
It gave him immense public capital and a lot of leverage within the House of Windsor itself.
That heroic image was the perfect lead-in to the whirlwind romance.
And that massive 1986 wedding. The book does a great job of capturing the media mood back then. They were seen as a breath of fresh air.
Informal, modern, cheerful.
The House of York was, for a very brief time, the public's favorite new branch of the monarchy.
And according to Lownie, that was the peak. The fall started almost immediately after.
It did. The fairy tale really starts to give way to strain and scandal very quickly.
So what were the first cracks? Beyond his long absences at sea, what does Lownie identify as really chipping away at that public goodwill?
Well, the strains were institutional, not just personal. Andrew's naval career meant he was away for long periods, and that created this huge emotional void. Lownie argues Sarah tried to fill it with high society socializing, always seeking that external validation.
And she struggled with the rigidity of royal life.
Intensely. And you combine all that with the escalating financial pressures. It becomes the defining, destructive theme of their lives for decades.
You can't really talk about this period without discussing the media landscape.
No.
The book anchors their marital breakdown right in the middle of that tabloid-driven culture of the 80s and 90s.
Lownie doesn't just see the media as reporting facts. He frames it as a kind of pressure cooker, designed to amplify every single misstep into a front-page scandal.
Right. And the tabloid exposures of Sarah's private life, those compromising photographs mentioned in the book.
They triggered massive public embarrassment. They absolutely hastened the separation. The media didn't just document the divorce. You could argue they actively drove it, turning their private pain into a national spectacle.
But this is where their story gets so unconventional. The long entanglement after the divorce.
It's truly bizarre. Even after the formal split, they continued to live these unusually intertwined lives.
Sharing homes, most famously Royal Lodge, raising their daughters Beatrice and Eugenie together.
And often appearing as this remarkably united, if divorced, family unit.
Lownie treats that continuous cohabitation as a core investigative thread, doesn't he?
It's central. It's
Yeah.
the mechanism that kept their individual problems feeding into this combined, chaotic public mess. It really makes you ask, if they were separated, what kept them bound together at Royal Lodge?
And the book points to institutional housing and a lack of real financial independence from the palace.
Exactly. They were effectively locked into this strange, very public codependency.
That unique arrangement is key to understanding everything that comes next.
And just a quick note for everyone listening. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
So let's move on to the character profiles that Lownie sketches out. He synthesizes so many anecdotes from staff and acquaintances.
And he delivers two very detailed but also very contradictory portraits of the Duke and Duchess.
Let's start with Prince Andrew. The source material Lownie uses paints a picture of a man who is just entirely convinced of his own importance.
He's described as impatient, explosive with staff, and obsessed with minute details of protocol.
Not just in public, but in private.
Right. There are accounts in the book of him berating employees over really trivial things, like the precise placement of his teddy bears.
Or a minor slip-up over his style and titles. It just shows how tightly his identity was tied to status and deference right from childhood.
For Lownie, this entitlement isn't just a personal failing. It's a direct consequence of the rigid, deferential structure he grew up inside.
And then there's Sarah Ferguson.
A complete contrast in many ways. The book describes her as genuinely charismatic, funny, eager for affection.
But underneath it all, deeply insecure.
Yes. She's shown oscillating between this warm accessibility and a relentless pursuit of extravagance, of risky ventures that just led to huge debts.
She was always chasing some project that promised quick financial redemption.
To sustain a lifestyle she just couldn't afford outside the royal purse.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? His rigid, status-driven entitlement and her desperate need for validation tied to spending.
It created this destructive feedback loop of financial chaos that just consumed their public lives.
And what's fascinating is how the internal culture of the House of Windsor enabled it all.
Lownie points out that hierarchy and protocol are designed to shape the family's responses, often overriding common sense. The Queen, he notes, repeatedly shielded Andrew from the full consequences for many, many years.
Granting him promotions and public visibility long after some of these scandals had already started to bubble up.
And that protection meant accountability was just constantly deferred. The royal environment allowed his behavior to flourish because the ultimate consequence, losing his status, was never really on the table.
Not until it was far, far too late.
And before we get into that final tipping point chapter of their story, we wanted to mention something. If you're interested in this style of investigative biography, you can find more on Mindful Moments.
That's our YouTube channel. It offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought.
And it's also really valuable for aspiring authors.
Okay, so let's get to that critical point where the fall became irreversible. The nexus of money, deals, and associations.
After his naval career ended, Andrew moved into this role as a UK trade envoy. Lownie basically describes him as an international fixer.
And this position, Lownie suggests, it became a kind of loophole.
A crucial one. It allowed Andrew to leverage his royal status for access to private business connections and global deals, essentially blending public duty with personal, sometimes very opaque, financial gain.
And this role took him into these elite social circuits all over the world, Europe, North America, the Middle East.
Which set the stage for his most damaging associations.
The narrative just keeps coming back to the constant, overwhelming role of money.
All the time. Lownie meticulously documents the couple's lifestyle, the expensive properties, massive security costs, loans, gifts. It required this perpetual debt cycle.
Long after their official public income sources had diminished.
And the central narrative in the later part of the book is, of course, the emergence and intensification of Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein.
This forms a huge chronological stretch of the book, detailing this whole chain of media investigations and legal actions.
And Lownie uses specific, verifiable documents to build his case. He's referencing court filings, freedom of information disclosures.
To trace the depth and the duration of that association, he details how the relationship continued long after Epstein's initial legal problems first surfaced.
That meticulous sourcing is what gives the book its devastating reputation.
And that sequence of events, those associations, ultimately led to the final consequences, the public curtailment of his status.
Right. The book culminates in the institutional decisions that steadily stripped him of his public standing. The removal or suspension of most of his public duties and military titles.
The public pressure, fueled by the timeline Lownie documented, it just became insurmountable, even for the Queen.
And the consequences rippled through the family. Lownie includes reported details of personal clashes, like a claimed physical altercation with Prince Harry after some alleged comments were made.
Which just illustrates the enormous tension Andrew's problems caused across the entire royal network.
So when you put it all together, what does this accumulation of evidence really mean thematically?
Lownie avoids preaching. He just provides the raw material for you to draw your own conclusions.
But the core themes are stark. Royal privilege stripped bare by accountability, the collision between inherited status and unforgiving modern media.
And profound entitlement and systemic denial.
The style of the book is crucial to its impact. It's highly journalistic, almost like a documentary. It's grounded in interviews, court papers, freedom of information material.
Not an opinion. He uses reported speech from staff and associates to corroborate events and bring that human element to life.
And the reception really confirms the weight of it all. It became a Sunday Times #1 bestseller, and critics universally described it as explosive, devastating, and deeply unflattering.
Most commentators seem to agree that Lownie's meticulous sourcing effectively seals any realistic chance of a comeback to frontline royal duties for Andrew.
The book brings us full circle, really, from an indulged child and a war hero to a figure who is now isolated by scandal, facing this public reckoning in a post-Elizabeth II era.
It raises a pretty important question for all of us, doesn't it?
I think so. Given the immense volume of detail that Lownie has accumulated about the financial dramas, the alleged behavior, the denial at the heart of the House of York, does the continued existence of this very messy drama change the wider debate about the role of the monarchy itself, especially in an age that demands transparency?
That is definitely something for you to consider. And if you found this expanded, detailed summary useful, please do let us know.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. You can also subscribe, share, or purchase the book via our link, and as always, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.